Hey everyone, Connor English here, hopping on today to chat about the Perennial Pasture cover, new to the Covers & Co perennial lineup for 2025. This pasture cover blend has been developed with many management styles in mind, utilizing high percentages of grasses as well as predominantly non-bloating legumes such as Sicer milkvetch, sandfoin, and bird's foot trefoil. Help reduce the risk of bloat, not taking it completely out of the picture, but definitely helping reduce the risk of it. We do still have a few alfalfas and clovers in the mix, just at a much reduced rate, just to help put producers in any management styles in a better position to utilize this pasture cover at multiple different times of the year. In establishing the pasture cover, we highly recommend to keep a field in mind for many years in advance prior to seeding it down to pasture. This will really help with the cleanliness of a field, utilizing some herbicide options and cultivation if needed prior to it going down into its establishment year, as there is no herbicide options once the seeds are put in place. Really good seed to soil contact is a must, and we highly recommend seeding this crop when moisture is readily available. On my farm west of Brandon, Manitoba, we've had really good success seeding in the month of May, usually when moisture levels are present and we have a good opportunity for moisture after seeding. In the past, we've utilized some cultivation just with the air seeder that we use. We put the seed in the ground very shallow and harrow over top. This past year, we utilized the land roller as we were silaging our companion crop in that summer, just to get the ground good and leveled with no risk of rocks entering the forage harvester. Utilizing a companion crop or a nurse crop will help take away weed pressure and allow the crop to really fill in earlier on. Sometimes perennial forages take a while to get up and going, and without something there growing with the perennials in the first year of establishment, weed pressure can be very present and take over a field. So in year one of harvest, if utilizing a companion crop, this past year we utilized the full season cover crop, seeding at full rate, and with the whole sole goal of taking that crop off early in the year to open the canopy up to allow the perennial forages to capture as much sunlight and moisture later into the summer as possible, setting themselves up for success moving into that initial winter. So we seeded our companion crop with perennials in the middle of May this year, had really good soil moisture and growing conditions, and harvested the companion crop at the end of July. That left us the months of August, September, and October for the perennials to really set their roots down into the soils and establish themselves well ahead of winter. We have utilized some cash cropping in the past while establishing perennials. These pictures are from 2022. We had lots of moisture throughout the entire summer that year, which allowed us to take a crop right until harvest and not putting the perennial forages in jeopardy. In 2024, we got dry in July, and I don't think this would have worked as nicely. We would have just had a reduction on our perennial establishment, and we wanted to take that companion crop off earlier in the year. So definitely works on depending on the year and depending on your farm's context on how you can utilize a nurse crop or a companion crop while establishing those perennials. In year two of solely perennial production, utilized obviously in a grazing scenario with this pasture cover in mind. Some of the things to take a thought about in that first year of solely perennial grazing, we've had really good success on our farm allowing those perennials to hit close to maturity prior to grazing them with the cattle. We just want those plants to really put a root system down as much as possible, because we are wanting this stand to be in production for many years to come. So we don't want to affect it early on and jeopardize years to come in the future. So we'll hit it at a pretty high density and give it a ton of recovery after we graze it. In some cases, we'll only graze it once that first initial year of solely perennial production, but this will be completely determined depending on your farm's context. If in a high rainfall event you have a lot of secondary growth on a pasture, by all means you could be in a good opportunity to graze it multiple times through the year. But just keeping in mind, we're wanting to establish this crop for many years to come, so maybe grazing it a little bit differently than you would in years to come would be very beneficial off the start. A few different management styles why this blend was developed the way it was. set up to be utilized in a lower intensity or a higher intensity environment. Producers that aren't moving their cattle as many times is completely all right with this blend. That is the sole reason why some of the non-bloating legumes have been added to the mix, and taking out higher percentages of things like alfalfa and clovers, just so that producers have a peace of mind when they're turning their livestock into bigger breaks of pasture, knowing that their cows have less risk of being in jeopardy out there for any bloat reasons. Obviously, still monitoring is very crucial, but just having the lower percentages right off the bat puts yourself in a better position right away. In a high intensity environment with long recovery, this blend is set up to really thrive in the stockpiling environment. High percentages of grasses will leave a very quality product for long rest periods, and not losing leaves on things such as alfalfas if we had higher percentages of alfalfas in the mix. Sicer milk vetch especially does very well in the long recovery environments. Once established, it is a very great legume to have in a pasture setting, and it will hold qualities just like some of the grasses in the mix as well. Going to dive in on the plant species within this mix. Tall fescue coming in at about 15% of the total blend. Like I said before, it's got some really great stockpiling ability, very high tonnage potential in this, and it really establishes a deep root system a few years into the blend being in the ground. Meadow brome grass has the ability to take off really early in the spring. It's got a greater frost resistance than smooth brome, which is used quite heavily across the prairies as well. All in all, the meadow brome is very common in perennial pasture settings across Canada, and been a very high production plant in many pastures across Western Canada. Timothy has been utilized in many hay stands for many years. It's got the ability to have really good leaf growth well throughout the summer months. Mix is really good, and just having a different type of grass in the mix here. Orchard grass, probably my favorite grass to utilize in a grazing setting for my context especially, comes in at 20% of the mix. It's got some great regrowth opportunities, very vigorous after being grazed or cut for hay. It's got a very dense root system and just tons of potential for high biomass and really high quality forage to use in a grazing environment. Intermediate wheatgrass, just very similar to meadow brome, very fast out of the gate in the spring for high amounts of biomass early on. High palatability at a younger maturity age, and it can work really well in the saline soil environment. We utilized some intermediate wheatgrass along with others in a saline blend a few years ago, and I was very happy with the establishment of it in that zone. Cattle did very well on it. It does get a little less palatable the further into the maturity, but all in all, very happy with its production. Creeping red fescue forms a very dense underlayer of sod. It's a fibrous root system, works really well in diverse pasture settings such as this one. It is another great species to have in the mix in a pasture setting. Bird's foot trefoil, one of our non-bloating legumes. It's got high adaptability in its environment. Bird's foot trefoil has the opportunity to stay vegetative for much longer through the growing season. When the bird's foot trefoil hits maturity, the entire plant does not hit maturity all at one rate. This really opens up the opportunity for multiple management styles to utilize this high production legume. Sandfoin, another one of our non-bloating legumes, beautiful pink flower across the canopy. It's got a higher digestibility over alfalfa, just with more desirable stems on the plants. In some cases across Western Canada, it's been able to hold its leaves, which is majority of the quality, a little bit longer after freezing events than something like alfalfa. So a very good legume to add into the mix on this pasture cover. Sicer milk vetch, probably one of my favorite legumes in a pasture setting. The abilities it has to produce high amounts of biomass that holds on to quality really long into the fall fits into this pasture cover really great. It's a non-bloating legume, and I have seen tremendous quality in this species holding on late into the fall and ensuring we get really good protein levels on our pastures if in a long recovery setting. Like I said before, this Sicer milk vetch really thrives in a long rest period environment. We've seen it take off in some season-long recovery pastures in the past, and it has been a great asset to our perennial pastures moving forward. Falcata alfalfa, a new species of alfalfa into some of our mixes this year. Really excited to be utilizing this. It's a yellow blossom alfalfa. It's got a creeping root styled root structure, really high leaf to stem ratio. There's been some studies done in the US about this crop. Producers that are grazing in the grazing environment really like it, just on the high digestibility side of things. It holds on to its quality much longer after the flowering maturity state than some of the purple blossom alfalfas, which really fits into this pasture mix really well. It thrives in cool, dry environments, which pretty much sums up Western Canada on most years. We also have a tap-rooted alfalfa coming in at 2%, heavily utilized in many hay and pasture settings across Western Canada. High quality of feed. It has some potential to reach moisture levels deep in the soil profile over some of the other species in the mix. Red clover rounds out our legumes in the pasture cover. It's got a really cool enzyme in it that allows the plants to break down the protein in the abomasum and not the rumen. The abomasum breaks down protein much more efficiently than over the rumen, which gives it a cool characteristic to be a part of this blend. Red clovers have done really well in growing in shaded environments, kind of in the underlayer of many perennial pastures in the past. A great legume to have in a perennial pasture setting. To learn more, please feel free to check out the website under the Perennial Pasture. We've got some great FAQ points on there, a few seeding recommendations, and please feel free to reach out to any of the territory managers if you feel this perennial pasture cover could work well in your environment.